It's a festive occasion. Justice Gopal Gowda has spoken so eloquently and forcefully. After his torrential address, I think all that I can do is to say that had I had the privilege of sitting with him in the bench, I would have said, I entirely and respectfully agree. He feels passionately about things that he believes in. I look at this photograph of Mr. Shankar, and that is typical. Some of the photographs are so telling. In fact, there's a great portrait photographer. He was Yusuf Karsh of Ottawa. He said, I don't photograph the physical person. I capture his soul and spirit. And this photograph which I see is the typical cynical Mr. Shankar in court. Whenever he thinks that the judge is wrong, he wouldn't say so, but he would look at him in the same way. And I have been a victim of that glare. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a beautiful occasion when a lawyer who has struggled hard, a lawyer's life is not a very pleasant one, particularly today when the dignity of the courtroom has broken down. I remember some 60 years ago, in the small-time courts which we used to frequent, a litigant would be called, the case would be called, and the name of the parties would be announced by the court crier. And he was so irreverential. And there's one judge who was then the second munsif, where all rural litigation was conducted in Bangalore. He chastised his court crier and said, when he shouted Timmaya, he said, don't say that, say Timmaya Navaru. And as long as he was the presiding judge in that court, nobody was addressed in a light-hearted way by the court crier. That was Mr. Papa Reddy, whose daughter is here in court today, Mr. Srinivas Reddy's wife. My memory goes back to almost 60 years when we could see the courtroom. The dignity of the courtroom has broken down. Both lawyers and judges are responsible for it. The exchange is not an enlightened one. The exchange is almost a bothersome mutual recrimination. That's why Chief Justice Gopal Gowda said that let us leave behind these small things and build up a great institution. People cynically said law is at least 100 years behind the needs of time. The courts are 200 years behind the needs of time. And the lawyers and judges 300. It conveys a very uncomfortable feeling that we have not been able to build a good system. For example, in the United States, of course, you can't copy everything from the United States, but one of the things is that there is a determination to build a right-based society, not a compensation-based society. Whenever people overemphasize the power of mediation, I think within myself, there are some cases which do not have an adjudicative disposition, and they are the ones which may properly be the subject matter of mediation. But violations of rights have to be critically evaluated, and decision must be on the basis of rights. In the United States, for 1,000 population, 338 new actions are brought before courts and tribunals and various other adjudicative bodies. In Singapore, it is 89. Why is this difference? In the United States, the education level and the income level is as good or perhaps on par with what obtains in Singapore, education level and per capita income. But why is this difference? The difference is because the United States is an open society and Singapore is a closed society. In Singapore, if you make a political speech without the script being approved by the authorities, there's a mandatory fine in the first instance of $1,000. If you repeat that mistake, an imprisonment for 1 year is mandatory. That's why the famous Lee thesis as Lee Kuan Yew, who built the modern Singapore, he propounded that if you want democracy, forget development. You want development, forget democracy. And that is the famous Lee thesis in economics. And as a counter statement, Louis Brandeis, a great judge of the American Supreme Court, said, either you have democracy or concentration of wealth in a few hands. You can't have both. This was the even in the liberal American system, a judge propounded this view. We are passing through perhaps the most critical bend of Indian history. What we could gather from the theme of what the Chief Justice Gopal Gowda said is that either you have democracy or concentration of wealth in a few hands. You can't have both. This statement stirs up a kind of a feeling with us that where are we in this world today? This next decade is going to be the most stunning decade in human history. Long time ago, 2,500 years ago, there was a philosopher in Ionia. He said, if you study subjects insularly, as physics, mathematics, law, philosophy, psychology, as watertight disciplines, you build knowledge, but you will never build ability. Science is knowledge, technology is ability. Technology can be built only if there is a convergence of various fields of knowledge, particularly today what is called material science. And unless you build a convergence, and I always say today a handheld mobile phone is the metaphor for this convergence. This is going to be the metaphor for the developments that we will see, the most stunning developments. Somebody said 20th century is the century of America, 21st will be the century of China and India. It is nobody's century. It is a century of new science, new biology, new medicine, and new physiology. Every one of our ideas, including the thought of the inevitability of death and taxes, as they say, all these ideas will be turned on their head in the course of the next 10 years. And society has to change. The whole edifice is on the basis of science, scientific education. As Justice Gopal Gowda said, you don't have mutual respect today. That is the principle of fraternity that the Constitution built in, spirit of concordial relationship between man and man. And this is perhaps one of the most difficult times that we are living through. And somebody said, man's inclination towards justice makes democracy possible, but his disinclination to justice makes it necessary. And today, there is no Indian civil society, the great society Mahatma Gandhi thought of. Our society is shattered, scattered, fractured, and consists of groups in perpetual conflict with each other. And there is no civil society, and that's the problem of any constructive movement. The legal profession, it is perhaps the most beautiful profession. Somehow, somewhere, sometime we have dropped some values. And when once these fundamental values are dropped, it's very difficult to pick them up. Sarath Chandra Bose was a very, very great lawyer. He died when he was hardly 60. P.B. Mukherjee, the Chief Justice of Calcutta High Court, happened to be one of his juniors. He was a very bright man, and in his young lawyer days, Sarath Babu was told that the lawyer had become very demanding and commercial. Immediately he sat in his car, went to his office, asked him to sit next to him. He drove straight to Ganga, and on the banks of Ganga, he stood up, took out gold coins one after another from his pocket and threw it into the river and said, "Mother, don't make me a slave of commercialism. Let me be a professional," and bless this young lawyer not to succumb to agnosticism or worship doubt. Please, and that was P.B. Mukherjee in his own autobiography refers to this incident. The continuing legal education is in the chambers of the senior. The best institutional training for the chambers of the senior. Actually, till 1970, legal education was wholly unintellectual. A man who had an agricultural degree could go through a conversion course for 1 year and become a solicitor. And it was in 1970, if I remember, Britain set up a committee called the Arm Rod Committee. It gave a report about the necessity of integrating the academic and the professional wings of the legal profession, and how law students should be exposed to the techniques of court work. And a coordinating committee was constituted. It's a beautiful writing, and the first in 1974, Lord Cross of Chelsea wrote about legal education in UK. He was the first president of the coordination committee. He said, I never had myself, he said in the summer of 1972, when the Lord Chancellor asked me to preside over this committee, I told myself that I had no formal legal education. I became a lawyer long before the Arm Rod Committee came up. And he said, the only qualification that perhaps the Lord Chancellor saw in me was that I could go to the subject without any preconceived notions as a good judge. This was and remarkable things happened thereafter. It was professionalized. For the first time in 1984, India thought of professional legal training. The National Law School came up. In 1993, I thought that there is need for an integrated legal academy, National Judicial Academy. And I had to fight a battle with the bureaucracy because it involved 100 crores of rupees. Thank God, I must thank the then Prime Minister, Mr. Narasimha Rao, who cooperated. When I sent an estimate for 88 crores, he talked to me and said, you don't know the bureaucracy. If you say 88 crores, they will bury this project. please start with 8 crores. We'll come up to 88 crores in course of time. And his wisdom, then I said, I can't change my letter. He said, don't worry about that letter, it will be with me. But you're right, initially you require only 8 crores. And of course I sent, slowly it was built up. It's a beautiful academy. The campus is one of the best in the world. There's no other campus anywhere in the world which can have this kind of infrastructure. And perhaps that's one of the underutilized facilities, like all law libraries are. The Supreme Court has one of the finest law libraries in Asia, and it's perhaps the most underutilized library. This is where possibly we have to think of many things. Unless you build up a powerful educational base for this country, the present dispensation is an exciting opportunity for this country to expiate and expiate its sins of neglecting the poor sections of society. And this is the one opportunity for them to cleanse themselves of that guilt. And you must, but the governments are insensitive. They think they can always flex muscles and impose this on people. It is more an effort of coordination. So as the law education is concerned, this finishing school that Mr. Shankar has thought of is a beautiful idea. Lawyers require a lot of polishing. And what I see in courts is a tremendous lack of sense of humor in court. And most of the tensions in court could be dissolved by a little gentle sprinkling of a sense of humor in court, which can be dissolved. And I find people flaring up. The debate between a lawyer and judge is more about how much one knew, how much more one knew over the other, than what are the needs of justice of the case. This kind of debate in court is a very provocative situation. I've seen, in fact, Justice Verma used to say, whenever he became a little angry in court, he confessed that I would press his hands, unseen by the lawyers, and then that's a signal for him to cool down. And I think that on this occasion, we are honoring Mr. Shankar and the completion of 50 years. To survive in the bar for 50 years is a very difficult thing. Bar is a very tricky place. Success is not achieved. Success is not necessarily achieved by merit. There are many other ways in which professional success is achieved. And this is what, in one of the beautiful lectures, the Tagore Law series, Rashbihari Ghosh, who wrote that monumental text on the law of securities in India, in the last paragraph he says this: lawyers' academic gains are not wholly thrown away. Don't worry about success in the bar. Success is achieved by many means other than perhaps the intellectual equipment of the lawyer. But a higher guerdon of honor awaits a lawyer who reads and who is intellectual. Otherwise, he quoted Shakespeare and said, you are a poor player who struts his hour on the stage and is heard no more. Many lawyers may make money, but they don't make an impression on the culture of the bar. And we have seen great lawyers in our times. And I had perhaps the privilege of listening to some of our most eminent lawyers. The most eminent was Mr. A.K. Sen. He was, whatever might be his political affiliations and his other reputations, he was in court perhaps the most masterly craftsman in the art of persuading the court. many lawyers. In fact, I was privileged to sit in the House of Lords on the invitation of the Lord Chancellor. There also, the lawyers, senior lawyer says, here, take their own time to come. Junior lawyer said, the senior is busy in some other court, he will come. I thought this disease also is in all over the world. And the junior lawyer he asked that kind of postponement, passing over as we call it, as a matter of right. The judge was annoyed. He said, we decline to grant you an adjournment. You go on with the case. He said, I am not a silk. It doesn't matter, he said. Then he said, I have not brought my helmet. I have not brought my helmet, he said. This is something which all the young lawyers, when they start their career, must be initiated into the culture of human dignity and human rights. Wherever I have had occasion to deal with it, I used to tell them, please show them 3 beautiful films. One was To Kill a Mockingbird. Of course, we have seen Gregory Peck acting there as the lawyer. It is one of the most moving situations. The other is when a teacher of science of evolution, he taught Darwinism and evolution, and he was prosecuted for blasphemy, for propagating tenets of Darwinism, which went against the tenets of Christianity. And that's what's the famous monkey trial. And that's the one case which cut the umbilical cord between religion and law. In 1842, the American Supreme Court declared we are a Christian country. Christianity is a part of the common law. Again, 40 years later, they affirmed that common law, Christianity was a part of common law. That umbilical cord between religion and law was cut, and cut finally in that monkey trial case, that Scopes trial. And a beautiful film is made on it. It's called Inherit the Wind. The film is called Inherit the Wind. It's a beautiful film. It shows how the chief prosecutor himself was hauled up as a witness in support of the Christian faith, and how he was cross-examined. He had to be got out of the court on a stretcher. That's the power of cross-examination. We don't see that kind of thing anymore here. And junior lawyers must understand that that's the most powerful tool in the common law tradition. In the adversarial system, when the judge is simply an umpire who is supposed to respond to a call, how is that? He's going to say out or not out. He can't get into the dust of the ring. But there, the way the man was cross-examined was something of a marvel. Then came the new film, La Amistad. I think recently, 2 years ago, the film came into the theaters in Bangalore. That was the story of how the feudal Americans kidnapped African slaves for slave labor in their industry, in their cotton fields. And how the captured indentured labor revolted and killed the captain. They were tried and ordered to be hanged. Then the appellate court came and said, they propounded one of the most beautiful axioms in law, and that is, if a man's freedom is taken away illegally, it is his right to regain it, even if it be that he inflicts death on his captor. And after 13 years, he comes back to his hometown. His wife and children have gone away. The whole thing was barren. That the film is a beautiful film which tells us it holds a mirror to our society and tells us really what we are, what kind of humanity that we possess inside. Ladies and gentlemen, today this is an occasion is a festive mood. In fact, Shankar, I have known him, I think he started his practice in 1962, not 52 as Mr. Venkatachalaiah said. 62, I see. 1951 was the year I entered the bar. And And the first thing my father cautioned me is, change the soles of your shoes. Let them not make a knock on the floor in the court. Today, if you tell a junior, he will perhaps take out the shoe itself. And the kind of courtroom dignity has collapsed. If you don't restore the courtroom dignity, you have a great responsibility for the judges to maintain it. Lawyers are engaged by clients because they think he is the best man in the world. And court can't cut him down and say you are an ignorant person. More often than not, the battle is not the justice of the case. It is who knows more and who is more ignorant or less ignorant. Chastising a lawyer in court for lack of preparation is the first sign of collapse of the court dignity. I have seen Justice Chagla, who's in pink of polish in court. Even if the most atrocious proposition was uttered before him, he would just tap his fingers. He always used to do that on the bench. And he would say, "Must you say that?" And the worst that was considered that could come out of him by way of criticism of a lawyer was these words, "Must you say that?" And lawyer would know that the judge is not happy with it. And it was something of a, out of thousands of judgments he rendered, he reserved only 2 judgments for this thing. Even that Bombay Education Society case was a rendered extempore judgment in court. That was the brilliant man. I had the great privilege of assisting him in some cases in the Supreme Court. In those days, his health had failed. He was a little asthmatic, and his pipe would never light up, and he would always be fighting with it to have it lit up, and it wouldn't work. And one night, we were sitting up to 11 o'clock in the night, and suddenly he remembered that he didn't have his supper. Then my client was a very resourceful man. He immediately telephoned a restaurant in Delhi, and they said, "Give us 15 minutes time for us to receive Chagla." The hotelier was so excited. He got all the members of his family there to receive. And Chagla was greatly embarrassed. And it was a beautiful thing. I think one of our young lawyers has written a book on some of the great lawyers of the past, jurists, lawyers, and judges. He has referred to this incident, and he refers to me as being with him. And it was such a moving thing. And Chagla was simply, look at the graciousness of the man. I had the great privilege last year to inaugurate the Chagla chair in constitutional law in the Bombay University. His son Iqbal invited me. We were there. It was a beautiful function. And then you had B.K. Mukherjee. I rate him as perhaps the greatest judge of India, Bijan Kumar. And his court, he never raised his voice above a whisper. And the lawyers would wait for every word that dropped from him. And the great picture of dignity. And it is something of a great experience. And there was Justice Shaw, who knew everything, every footnote case in the Mullah Civil Procedure Code, he would know. And that is all great judges. I think Mr. Shankar would have made a good judge, but is a more prosperous lawyer. He didn't have to be condemned to the share of poverty that judges are condemned to. And it's a payback time for him. The bar and the judges and his colleagues have been so gracious and kind to him, good to him. And I think he has now come up with this idea of an academy. And I know the best academy is the chambers of the senior. I know Settlewood every Friday evening would have a conference with his juniors. in the lawn of his Bangalore. He was the Attorney General. And good food was served. He was very meticulous about it. The way it was served, the crockery, the juniors were treated as kings. And on that one occasion, a case in which he had appeared for the Maharani of Patiala in a case. And those days, the seniors argued the day fee was 1,040 rupees. And he received that money from the lawyer, advocate and record. And the case came up after lunch. Within 15 minutes, the case was over. In one of his Friday evening conferences, the Maharani Sahiba sent her secretary with a plate covered by an embroidered cloth. And he thought some sweets had been sent and wanted to be distributed to them, the juniors and the clerks and the office staff. When he opened it, he found a plate full of sovereigns. He became furious and he told the secretary of the Rani Sahiba, please tell your Rani Sahiba the Attorney General of India doesn't accept bakshis. Take it away. But there are cases in which lawyers even accept a bottle of whiskey. So that stern discipline, senior counsel never met clients. The silk, that's why in England a silk and a judge can have a drink together, not with a solicitor. If a judge is found sharing hospitality with a solicitor, it's a misconduct. But when he even shares a drink with a silk, they think that he has no personal interest in any litigation. These are matters which are very important today. In any Australian university, if you go there, you find the chancellor or a professor or both are all fellows of the Royal Society. There are 168 fellows of the Royal Society in Australia. That's the benchmark of their scientific excellence. We are 250 times Australia's population. We have just 10 of them. And ladies and gentlemen, please don't be deluded by the kind of economic growth that we boast of. The whole of the FDI, the foreign direct investment, and the FII, financial institutional investors, they are all contributing to the Indian capital of about 15%. The rest of Indian financial capital is made up of what is called domestic savings or the household savings. It's the hasib, the homemaker, that builds up the economy of this country. The household savings are phenomenal. And the remittances from our masons, fitters, drivers, plumbers, workers who work in countries, particularly in the United Arab Emirates, their remittances is far higher than our exports in software industry. Software exports are about 52 to 55 billion, but the remittances from these workers to India is 60 billion this year. The financial year ended 31st, it is 60 billion. There is a beautiful story said about it. There was one Cornwell who crisscrossed whole of America speaking about the prosperity of India. India, he said, the poor own much more than twice the American circulating currency. They own $9.3 trillion worth of assets. But those assets of the poor have not become turned into capital. And he told a story of an Indian merchant who had been promised a great wealth, a great treasure, if he only searched for it, by an astrologer. This man went all over the world in search of the promised treasure and came back tired, exhausted and old. He needed a drink of water. Then he looked into his well, which had silted up. He took an axe and dug into it. Lo and behold, he discovered the Golconda diamond mines. This is the allegory of the story, that in your backyard there's so much of wealth, so much of potential, and it can create so much of wealth for the country. This is where we have to understand the situation in this country today, and we must also understand, judges and lawyers, that this is a very critical period of Indian history. This bend of Indian history can be very tricky. United Nations said, when they prescribed 33% of women's representation in the parliament, in the apex lawmaking bodies, they said this 30% is a magic number. This is the critical mass, as they say. When the nuclear interaction attains critical mass, there's a chain reaction. And this is a social critical mass. And they say if 30% of India's, any country's population for that matter, lose faith in the justice of their society, there is a negative social critical mass which unleashes a chain reaction of cynicism. That cynicism is a power of destruction and not of reconstruction. The restoration of this balance is essentially in the hands of the judiciary. And if it is in the hands of judiciary, it is only a metaphor that it is in the hands of the lawyers of the country. They have a great responsibility to usher in an egalitarian and a just society. Today, 87% of national income goes into the hands of 15% of India's population. The bottom 20% has 1.5% of India's national income. An unequal society lives under a constant dread of an impending disaster. And this is the warning that Chief Justice Gopal Gowda administered in his very, very sweet words. And this is the task cut out for the lawyers. Understand, and Brandeis once said, a lawyer who doesn't know economics and sociology is apt to be a public enemy. And if you don't have a background of the social and economic conditions in which you work, perhaps the profession can be a disastrous instrument in degrading the nation and in the comity of nations. I'm most grateful to you for this invitation. Shankar is a special person. He has grown 2 blades of grass where one grew, and deserves the better of mankind. Thank you very much. I wish him all the best.